Pam Bondi entered the Hillsborough County Courthouse, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The scent of old paper and stale coffee filled the air, a familiar atmosphere for legal battles. But this case felt different. The stakes were high, and the opposition, a powerful corporate giant accused of fraudulent practices, had spared no expense in its defense. At the front of the courtroom, Judge Richard Calloway sat behind the bench, flipping through a thick stack of papers. His expression was unreadable, but Pam caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. A smirk. She had seen that look before. Amusement, skepticism, the kind reserved for attorneys deemed too young or too ambitious for their own good. She took her seat at the plaintiff's table, setting down her leather-bound case file. Across from her, Charles Merritt, the defense attorney, adjusted his silk tie. In his late 50s, he was the type who had built a career on reputation alone, coasting on courtroom theatrics and old money connections. He barely acknowledged her, already convinced of his victory. The heavy doors swung open again as the jury filtered in. Men and women from different walks of life, their faces a mixture of curiosity and boredom. Some adjusted their glasses, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pam didn't just see faces. She saw people, stories, biases, hopes, and doubts. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Calloway cleared his throat and straightened his robe. "Be seated," he said, his tone casual, almost dismissive. He shuffled his papers before peering over the top of his glasses. "Miss Bondi, I trust you're ready to proceed." Pam nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge exhaled through his nose, a faint chuckle escaping. "Let's hope this doesn't turn into a circus," he muttered, just loud enough for the courtroom microphone to catch it. A few jurors exchanged glances. Merritt smirked. Pam didn't react. She simply opened her case file and pulled out her notes. She was used to being underestimated in the courtroom, but this time it would be different. The judge had no idea what was coming. She stood, her voice steady. "Your Honor, today's case is about more than just legal technicalities. It's about accountability." Judge Calloway raised a hand, cutting her off. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Miss Bondi. This is a preliminary motion, not a grand-standing performance." Soft chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Across the
aisle, Merritt leaned back in his chair, adjusting his cuffs with a smirk.
He had stood beside deep-pocketed corporations before, making problems disappear with technical jargon and well-placed favors. He was certain today would be no different. Pam clasped her hands behind her back. "Understood, Your Honor. But the facts speak for themselves. The defendants knowingly misled thousands of people, promising services they had no intention of providing." Judge Calloway exhaled sharply, flipping through the file. "That's a strong accusation, Miss Bondi. One I assume you can back up?" Pam met his gaze. "I can, and I will." The judge arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Let's hear from the defense first, shall we?" He turned toward Merritt. "Mr. Merritt, enlighten us." Merritt rose, flashing an easy grin. "Your Honor, this case is built on emotion rather than fact. My client, a respected financial institution, has followed all regulatory guidelines. If some individuals felt misled, that is unfortunate but hardly illegal." He paused for effect before continuing. "What we have here is a classic example of a plaintiff trying to punish a successful company simply because they don't like how business works. There's no fraud, no deception, just a misunderstanding inflated to the level of litigation." Judge Calloway nodded slowly, as if weighing Merritt's words. Then, with a glance at Pam, he let out a small chuckle. "Miss Bondi, are we really going to waste the court's time over a misunderstanding?" The remark was like a slap in the face. Pam didn't flinch. Instead, she let the silence stretch, forcing the courtroom to sit in it. The jury, the clerks, even Merritt, all of them waited, eyes fixed on her. Then, with deliberate calm, she picked up a document from her file. "No misunderstanding, Your Honor," she said, stepping toward the bench. "Just evidence." She placed the document in front of Judge Calloway. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the page. His smirk faltered. Just slightly. Pam turned to the jury. What Mr. Merritt calls a misunderstanding is, in reality, a deliberate, calculated strategy. A pattern of deception designed to mislead customers into signing contracts they were never meant to understand. She gestured toward the stack of files on her desk. And I have the proof. A shift rippled through the room. The air thickened. For the first time, Judge Calloway's expression hardened. Not amusement, not dismissal, but something closer to recognition. And Pam wasn't done yet. She held the silence, letting the weight of her words settle. The judge, now fully engaged, tapped his fingers against the armrest before shifting his gaze to Merritt. Mr. Merritt, Calloway said, clearing his throat. I assume you have an explanation for this? For the briefest moment, Merritt's confidence flickered. Then, forcing a chuckle, he straightened his tie. With all due respect, Your Honor, I fail to see how one document— Pam was already reaching for another. Not just one. She returned to her table, lifting a neatly bound stack of papers, their pages covered in highlighted clauses and footnotes. I have over 50 contracts here, she continued, her voice steady. Each one contains nearly identical language, misleading customers into believing they were making low-risk investments when, in reality, they were signing away their financial security. Merritt opened his mouth to object, but Pam was already flipping through the pages. She turned the first document toward the jury. Section 14B states that the company reserves the right to adjust annual fees based on projected market trends. Sounds harmless, doesn't it? Except that in practice, those market trends are determined internally without oversight, allowing the company to raise rates arbitrarily without notifying customers until it's too late. She turned another page. Section 22C. Customers who attempt to withdraw funds early are subjected to administrative penalties, a vague phrase by design. But in reality, those penalties exceed the amount of their actual investment, leaving them with nothing. Another page, Section 31A. The company explicitly denies liability for market-driven losses. Pam paused, her gaze sweeping the courtroom. But what this clause doesn't say is that my client's funds were never invested in the market at all. Instead, they were funneled into high-risk private ventures that benefited executives while leaving customers in the dark. She set the paper down. This isn't business. This is theft. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Calloway was no longer amused. He leaned forward, fingers clasped, studying her intently. Pam met his gaze, unwavering. Now, Your Honor, I'm happy to debate the legal definitions of fraud and deceptive practices all day long, she said. But what I won't allow is for my clients to be dismissed as people who simply misunderstood what they were signing. She let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. The only real misunderstanding here is the belief that this company could get away with this forever. Merritt was shifting in his seat now, his face stiff. Your Honor, I move to dismiss these claims on the basis of— Pam cut in before he could finish. Before Mr. Merritt continues, I'd like to submit one more piece of evidence. She returned to her files, extracting a single page, a printed internal memo. She handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. As Judge Calloway skimmed the first few lines, his jaw visibly tightened. Pam turned to the jury. This document, obtained from a whistleblower, shows that company executives knew about these fraudulent practices for over 5 years. It explicitly instructs employees to— she glanced down at the text, and I quote, delay disclosures for as long as legally possible. She scanned the jury's faces. Disgust, shock, anger. Then, turning back to the judge, she delivered the final statement, her voice unwavering. Your Honor, this isn't a misunderstanding. This is a company that knew exactly what it was doing and expected the legal system to protect them. The judge exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around the memo. His smirk was long gone, and still, Pam wasn't finished. The silence stretched, heavier now, thick with the weight of what had just been revealed. Judge Calloway's eyes lingered on the document, his grip firm as though holding on to something far heavier than paper. For the first time that morning, Charles Merritt looked truly unsettled. The smug confidence, the effortless deflections, gone. A crack had formed in his polished composure. He cleared his throat, forcing a tight smile. Your Honor, this so-called memo is nothing more than an unverified document. Its authenticity is questionable at best, and even if it were legitimate, it does not constitute evidence of wrongdoing. We can't allow— Pam didn't let him finish. Your Honor, she cut in, her voice sharp, unwavering. This document was obtained directly from a former employee of the defendant's firm. Not only did they confirm its legitimacy, but they also provided internal email chains. She stepped forward, handing another file to the bailiff, where executives openly discussed these fraudulent tactics. The bailiff delivered the file to Judge Calloway. He flipped through the first few pages, his expression darkening. Merritt shot up from his chair. Objection, this is overruled, Judge Calloway said, his tone firm. He set the documents down, eyes narrowing. Mr. Merritt, do you have an actual legal argument, or are you just here to waste my time? Merritt's mouth opened, but no words came out. Pam took a slow breath. The shift had happened. The power in the room was hers now. She turned to the jury, her voice steady. For years, this company has hidden behind fine print and vague wording, knowing full well that the people signing these contracts didn't have the legal expertise to fight back. They banked on confusion, on intimidation, and most of all on doubt. She let that word hang in the air. A few jurors shifted in their seats. But today that doubt is gone because now we have proof. Proof that they knew what they were doing. Proof that their intent was never honest business but deception. She turned back to the judge. And if this court allows them to walk away from this, then we aren't just failing my clients. We're telling every corporation in America that they can do the same. That the legal system will look the other way. A murmur rippled through the jury box. In the front row, a woman who had remained expressionless for most of the hearing pressed her lips together and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Pam had them. Judge Calloway tapped his fingers on the bench, slow, deliberate. Then he looked at Merritt. Well? The judge's voice was sharp. Do you have any response to this evidence, Mr. Merritt? Anything at all? Merritt hesitated. His usual tricks, his charm, his bluffs, his courtroom theatrics were useless now. Everyone could see it. The jury, the gallery, even the court reporters had stopped typing, waiting for his response. He swallowed, adjusted his tie. Finally, he sat back down. No, Your Honor, he muttered. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, studying him for a moment before shifting his attention to Pam. His expression wasn't quite admiration, but it was close. Proceed, Ms. Bondi. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. Pam took a measured breath, steadying herself as the judge's words echoed in the silent room. Proceed, Ms. Bondi. She had spent years in courtrooms like this, facing off against men like Charles Merritt. Judges, like Calloway, corporations that thought money could buy them immunity. But right now, in this moment, she wasn't just another attorney arguing a case. She was the only person in the room who had complete control over the narrative. And she wasn't about to waste it. She turned to the jury, her gaze steady. What happens next is up to this court. But before you make up your minds, I want you to understand what's really at stake. She gestured toward the back of the room, where her clients sat. Ordinary people, most of them older. Some with worried expressions, others gripping their hands tightly in their laps. These are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, she said. They are retirees who lost their life savings, parents who took second jobs just to keep their homes, small business owners who trusted a system designed to work against them. Pam stepped closer to the jury, lowering her voice just enough that they had to lean in to hear. The company's executives sat in boardrooms, drinking expensive coffee, deciding how far they could push people before they fought back. They counted on silence, they counted on fear, and they counted on lawyers like Charles Merritt convincing courts like this one that fraud is just business as usual. She let the weight of that settle before turning back to the judge. Your Honor, the defense would have you believe this is a misunderstanding, that my client simply didn't read the fine print. She paused, locking eyes with Merritt one last time. But the only misunderstanding here is that this company thought they could get away with it. But the truth is, the fine print wasn't just a detail. It was a trap. A cage disguised as a contract. The moment they signed, the door slammed shut. Pam stepped back toward the plaintiff's table, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. She placed her hands on the table and met Judge Calloway's gaze directly. The only question now, Your Honor, is whether this court will let them get away with it. Silence. Absolute and unshakable. For the first time, Calloway didn't reach for his gavel. He didn't crack a joke. He didn't smirk. He just sat there, staring at the documents in front of him as if he were seeing them for the first time. The jury remained still. Some looked down at the contracts before them. Others glanced at Pam's clients, their expressions shifting, from skepticism to something else. Anger, maybe. Or duty. Pam exhaled quietly. She had done what she came to do. Then Judge Calloway spoke. "Mr. Merritt," he said, his voice heavier than before. "After reviewing this evidence, I see no grounds for dismissal." Merritt's face stiffened. "Your Honor, The judge raised a hand. "No." His voice was firmer now. "Your client will answer these claims in full trial." He turned to Pam. "Ms. Bondi, your motion to proceed is granted." Pam didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." But Charles Merritt knew. So did the jury. So did the gallery. Pam Bondi had already won the battle, before the war had even begun. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin as if absorbing the weight of his own ruling. His smirk from earlier had vanished, replaced by something heavier, something reluctant. A man who had walked into this hearing expecting an open and shut case, only to realize he had misjudged everything. Pam remained standing, unwavering. She wasn't here for approval. She wasn't here to bask in the moment. She had done what she set out to do, forced the court to take this case seriously. Charles Merritt, on the other hand, had gone pale. His fingers gripped the edges of his legal pad, knuckles white. But there was nothing left to say, no loopholes to exploit, no more legal maneuvers to bury the truth beneath paperwork. Calloway let out a slow breath, then turned toward the court reporter. "Let the record show that the defense's motion for dismissal is denied. This case will proceed to trial." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Pam didn't react, but she felt it. The energy in the room had shifted. Permanently. Calloway looked back at her, and for the first time there was no condescension in his expression. No smirk, no amusement. Just the realization that he had underestimated her, and worse, that he had allowed himself to be played by the very people she was fighting against. He straightened his robe, cleared his throat, then spoke directly to her. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice quieter than before. "You've built a compelling case here today." Pam simply nodded. "That was the goal, Your Honor." A pause. Then Calloway glanced at the documents one last time before shifting his gaze to Charles Merritt. "I strongly advise your client to reconsider their position before trial," he said, his tone carrying an edge that hadn't been there before, "because based on what I've seen today, I suspect they may not like the outcome." Merritt's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what that meant. His client might have billions, but money didn't rewrite facts. And now, the court was paying attention. Pam gathered her files, her movements measured, professional. This wasn't a moment for celebration. This was only the beginning. But as she glanced up, she caught something unexpected. The judge gave her a small nod, not an apology, not an admission, a nod of respect. Pam Bondi had forced a system that favored the powerful to acknowledge that today it had met its match. She walked out of the courtroom with the same steady stride she had entered with. She didn't rush, didn't look back. She had done her job. Now it was up to the system to do its part. Outside, the air buzzed with reporters. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in her direction. "Ms. Bondi, how do you feel about today's ruling? What's your next move?" Do you believe the company will settle before trial? Pam didn't slow. This wasn't the time for press, conferences, or sound bites. Instead, she turned toward the courthouse steps where her clients stood. Men and women who had been ignored, dismissed, taken advantage of for far too long. A woman in her 60s, wearing a faded blue cardigan, stepped forward hesitantly. Her voice was quiet but firm. Does this mean we have a chance? Pam met her gaze, and for the first time that day allowed herself a small smile. Yes, she said simply. You do. The woman pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening with relief. Others murmured their thanks. Some just nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Pam didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. This was why she did what she did, to give people back what had been stolen from them. Behind her, Charles Merritt emerged from the courthouse, his usual confidence replaced by something colder. He avoided her gaze, pulling out his phone as he stalked toward a black town car. Pam knew exactly what was happening. His clients were already calling, already panicking, already preparing for damage control. Good. Judge Calloway's ruling didn't guarantee victory, but it sent a message. People were watching now. The powerful weren't invincible, and no amount of legal trickery could erase the truth forever. Pam turned back to her clients. This isn't over, she told them. Not yet, but today you made them listen, and that's where real change starts. The woman in the cardigan nodded, gripping Pam's hand briefly before stepping back into the crowd. Pam took one last look at the courthouse, then exhaled, already thinking of the work ahead. Justice wasn't about winning one battle. It was about never letting the fight be forgotten. And that was a battle Pam Bondi had no intention of losing.